Hi everyone, my name is Marina Iyeme-Eteng and this is my husband.
My name is Wilfred Eteng.
Today we're just going to be having conversation about the perceptions that we had about the work environment in Canada before we moved here and what our reality has been now that we've been here a while.
Absolutely.
Okay, so well, we've been here a couple of years, and of course, like every newcomer, there were perceptions that we had or assumptions that we had about the workplace and work culture and the kind of work that we'll be able to do in Canada. And then being here now and having been through a couple of different work organizations, and what would you say is different? Like, what's the difference between your perception before we came and what the reality has been so far?
I would say I think one of the big ones would be finding commensurate work. I think you leave your home country feeling like, okay, I should be able to get, something that's similar to what I was doing back home. But reality is, it's not always the case. Some people who are able to go back into the professions at the same level, and some people have to start all over again, or even have to move separately.
Absolutely.
So.
And for me, I think what informed the perception that I had before we came here was going through the immigration processes and how you have to have your credentials evaluated. And then the report comes back to say that your degree is considered an equivalent of what a Canadian degree would be. But it just seems like the Canadian employers don't fully understand that, don't understand what it means when you say a foreign degree is an equivalent of a Canadian degree. So there's not a lot of trust. I found that there was not a lot of trust. There was a bit of misalignment in the expectation that I had versus what the employers had. And in my case, of course, I had to update my credentials. I had to upskill, go back to school to study just so I could be a little more competitive when it comes to getting into the workforce. So I'd say that's one. I agree with you there that that's one of the things that will typically shock newcomers because the expectation is definitely different from the reality. But do you find that after people upskill and update their credentials, do you find that it becomes easier for them to find commensurate work?
Yeah, I think so. Using my case as an example where coming here and you couldn't find the same thing. I had to start almost all over again. But I realized that, the thing about Canadian work experience is huge. And, coming into Canada, you don't know what that means. You feel like I've worked at a particular sector for 15 years. I know exactly what I'm doing. When you come in here, you almost have to start it again. But as soon as you get into the groove of things, you find that as soon as one employer, takes that first chance, you're able to move as much as you can. So I think it's really helpful. It's one of the things that I didn't realize should be a thing. But
yeah, it does get hard in the moment, like realizing and facing that reality that you can't get work at the same level. But I mean, it takes a while, but eventually you're able to then become more competitive to find work at the same level from where you're coming from. So that's a huge one, like not being able to find commensurate work. One other perception I would say one other thing that I had was the shocker of the cultural differences between the work environment. Like we are originally from Nigeria, you know that, right? So from Nigeria, the work culture is very different from what I've seen here. Typical example, the typical Nigerian manager is very literal when they're talking to you. Like if you want somebody to prepare a report and you want to have it by 12, you would hear them say, can I have this report ready on my desk at 12? But coming here, you will hear it like, hey, do you want to maybe have that report ready for me at 12? You think it's a question. It's not a question. It's actually an instruction. So that part I would say I struggled with initially, just peeling the layers back to get to the essence of what the person is trying to tell you. Do you have any similar
absolutely.
experience?
I think it's the same thing. You almost have to read between the lines.
Absolutely.
What is not being said. And some of my experiences would go like, exactly what you said. And then I would have to respond to the email and say, are you asking me to get this done? In fact, let's just go back a bit. My experience is, Fred, can you get this done as quickly as you can? And then my response is, when do you want this done? And like, oh, when you're able to, like, do you want it done at so date? So I think that was different because I think my experience before coming to Canada is just like you said, hey, Fred, I need this done by 2 o'clock on 20th of October, get it delivered. But here is more subtle approach. You have to read between the lines. So,
But do you think that is influenced though by the that part of the difference in the cultures of the two countries? Because
yeah,
even outside of work, the average Nigerian is very literal, very
yeah,
direct, well, audacious like that, you know?
yeah,
But the average Canadian we find is more polite, more subtle in how they're asking for things. So
yeah.
do you think that plays a role in how it shows up in the workplace?
Absolutely. And I think, before we came, we knew, excuse me, that Canadians are really polite and nice. And like, okay, we'll see. And that is showing up at work. And I think for me, when I started to lead people and then having to be very literal, like, hey, Frank, I need this done by 2 p.m. You could see the shock, like now? Like, yeah. And then so I had to dial back a bit and, go with the flow. But yeah, it's been interesting knowing that.
So that's like you taking a step back to understand the
exactly,
culture at play and make the necessary adjustments.
I think both cultures, there needs to be a balance.
There has to be balance.
It's not one over the other. If not, you're not bringing your true self to work. So you try to find a balance between both.
Yeah, it's being able to read the room and speak the language that the people you're dealing with understand. So even if you're coming with to a large extent, we have been influenced and we have been shaped by the culture of where we're coming from, but being able to find that fine balance between the culture of where you're coming from and the culture that's at play where you are. I think that just gives you like a good experience, like best of both worlds kind of situation.
Yes, and you take what you've learned from maybe say your first employer, and you go to the next one, and you become better at being able to manage people, based on the experiences you've had.
But do you think if you ever had to go back to Nigeria to lead people, you're going to struggle with going back to being that literal? Definitely. I feel I will.
I think I will so many people will get away with stuff.
Yeah.
Like, no one said to do anything.
When you say, can I have this done as soon as possible? Soon as possible for me could be in 2 weeks. What are we saying?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay. Another thing about the workplace, and we're talking about this recently, it's about addressing people by their first names. Did you find that strange?
Very strange. Very strange. I think one experience I had was I had an interview with an employer, and it was a really senior executive. And he walks in and says, my name is this. And I said, oh, hello, sir, nice to meet you. He's like, no, call me this. I'm like, sir, call you this. So I think it's just the way it is. And it takes some getting used to. It's weird at first, and sometimes even now I make the mistake and sir, ma'am, it's fine. But I think people understand that, they also know that you're from a different culture. So when you say that, they're not offended. Like, oh, no, it's fine, it's okay. So
I remember when I first went to school, when we just moved here, I used to get into trouble a lot in class because my instructors didn't understand why I would never call them by their first names. I would say sir, I would say ma. When I walk into class, I'm like, good morning, sir. And they're like, it's whatever. Like, it's, say my instructors in this Fred, say, just call me Fred. I'm like, you don't understand. Like, I'm coming from a culture where you walk into school and you call a Nigerian lecturer by their first name, you are never going to graduate from that class. You're going to do the program forever. So it was hard coming to that point where I'm like, getting comfortable calling people by their first names. Again, I think that is very largely influenced by the culture in Nigeria. Like, we're very heavy on the culture of respect, especially when it comes to when there's power dynamics, like from a student to a lecturer to somebody who's older. So that thing of literally deferring to somebody who's in a higher position than you are, it's ingrained in all of us. So
absolutely.
So coming here and having to call somebody who's like the CEO of an organization. Like, I remember the first time that I met the current CEO of our my current employer. At that point, he was vice president, walked up to me and said, hi, I am, and called her first name. I'm like, are you this person? And she said, yes. And I stood up. I was going to shake her with my two hands. I'm like, hi, ma. She was like, no, just call me her first name. I'm like, this is going to take some getting used to. But I think I'm getting used to it. I'm getting used to getting more comfortable addressing people by their first names, especially when it's junior employee to like a more senior leadership employee. So that definitely is a shocker. That's something I'm going to remember to drop in Canada if I ever visit Nigeria, because it will still not be acceptable to ever address somebody who's in a more senior position by their first name.
Yeah. Okay. I think one of the other ones that stands out is, employee interactions, like your fellow colleagues at the office. whether it's over Skype or Zoom or whatever kind of meeting, or even personal, or sorry, face to face, I find that the interactions are quite personal. Personal in the sense that they could talk about things they've done with their kids, the names of their kids, their pets, where they've been. It was not weird, but it was like, okay, everyone's so open. I think for us, it's, coming from where we are, it's work is work, home is home. You don't bring home to work whatsoever. But I find that there's a very slim balance between those two, where people can openly speak about their spouses, their things they do, their pets, names of the pets, cats, blah, blah, blah. And then the meeting starting at 8, and the first few minutes is a little chit chat. Like, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting.
What have you noticed that?
Oh, of course. I struggled a lot. I struggled a lot with that because, again, like you said, coming from a place where work is work, and then if we're going to have a personal conversation, then let it be on our own time, not necessarily during the meeting, starting the meeting where, what did you do over the weekend? And everybody takes some time to explain like the really personal stuff that they get up to. And the first few meetings I was in, that was after, I'm like, what exactly is going on here? Like, are you guys ready to walk or no?
But I find that helps to build relationships.
Absolutely.
Members,
it
right?
almost always influences it's team really, bonding.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But first it was like, okay. But over time it almost forced you to want to say something too as well. And everyone was able to connect and say, oh, do you like this sport or football, soccer, or whatever it is? And this started to find some commonalities between employees, and that helped to build the team. So yeah, that's a good one.
In the beginning, I would say it was a bit of pressure for me because I felt like, okay, now that everybody's sharing this, are we all mandated to do that? So I had a couple of one-on-one conversations with other team members to say, okay, this is a bit new to me. When this happens, is everybody mandated to share? But I noticed that there were other people who were not sharing as well. So I was wondering, like, is this the norm, or what should I be doing? And I'm trying to learn to adjust to this way of communicating at work. What would you suggest? And they're like, oh, absolutely no pressure. It's typically for people to just get to know each other, especially, I mean, if you have been working a while, at some point it's going to go beyond work because life is happening, right?
Absolutely.
So that's where the adjustment for me started from, just learning to see from the angle of it's for people to get to know you. And with me coming from a different culture, I wanted people to know me. I wanted to learn about people, but how do you learn about people and not share anything in return? So how do you know people, but they don't know you? And I found out much later that most people on my team just wanted to get to know me. So it's not because they were trying to be invasive or trying to be nosy. It was just their own way of saying, what do you get up to? Tell me what life is like for you here. And over time, it has now become very second nature for me to just join a meeting and say, so what did you get up to over the weekend? And I can tell them everything. The parties that my kids went to, the basketball they went to play, because, I mean, that's part of what it means to be Canadian in a Canadian workplace, right? So marrying those two, the private, don't share so much from Nigeria, where we're coming from, and learning the balance of this is what's acceptable to share in the Canadian workplace. So I would say overall it's been a bit of a nice, interesting blend of both cultures.
Good journey. And I think, that's the beauty of being Canadian. It's almost like a melting pot of different cultures and experiences. And, I wouldn't change that for anything.
Absolutely. Well, this has been great conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for listening. And thank you, Threads Cultural Conversations, for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully we can do this next year.
Don't push it.